Welcome to Crimson Chronicles, February 1258. A man walks through his own treasury. Guards flank him on both sides, not his guards. He's looking at gold he spent 50 years protecting. Gold that bought silks. Gold that paid scholars. Gold that filled vaults. While his army went without armor, the men beside him are watching his face. They're waiting to see if he understands yet. He doesn't speak. Behind him, his city is burning. Ahead of him, something worse than fire. This is Caliph Al-Musta'sim, ruler of Baghdad, commander of the faithful, spiritual heir to Muhammad himself. In 3 hours, he'll be dead. But not by blade, not by arrow, not by any method you'd expect, because the men who destroyed his city follow rules you've never heard of. And what they did to his family wasn't just execution. It was architecture, a blueprint printed in blood, so that every king from Damascus to Delhi would know exactly what defiance costs. They didn't need to repeat it. They only needed to do it once. For 500 years, Baghdad was the axis, not just of an empire of thought itself. This was the city where Greek philosophy met Persian astronomy, where Indian mathematics merged with Islamic law, where the world's knowledge concentrated into libraries that cataloged everything from medicine to mechanics. The House of Wisdom alone held texts that would take you 3 lifetimes to read. Al-Khwarizmi invented algebra here. Al-Razi wrote medical encyclopedias that Europe would translate 400 years later. Scholars traveled from Spain to Samarkand just to study in Baghdad's maze. The city's population exceeded 1 million. Its infrastructure channeled water through underground canals. Its markets traded goods from China to Cordoba. Its hospitals treated patients regardless of faith or wealth. This wasn't Rome fading into memory. This was a civilization at its operational peak, and ruling over all of it. The Caliph, not just a king, not just a political figure, the Caliph was the successor to Muhammad, the spiritual authority over millions of Muslims, a man whose legitimacy stretched back through 37 generations. Al-Musta'sim inherited that title in 1242. He also inherited something else, a government that had been decaying for 2 centuries. The Abbasid Caliphate still spoke with religious authority, but its armies mostly mercenaries, its governors semi-independent warlords, its treasury filled but never spent on defense, because Baghdad had survived internal weakness before. It had endured civil wars. It had outlasted rival caliphs. It had watched empires rise and collapse around it, while its scholars kept writing, and its markets kept trading. So when distant reports arrived about horsemen in the east, horsemen who had already erased the Khwarezmian Empire, horsemen who had depopulated cities in Persia, horsemen who didn't stop at rivers or mountains or negotiated borders, Baghdad took note and did nothing. The Mongols weren't an army. They were a mechanism, a system refined over 50 years of constant warfare across terrain that spanned frozen steppe to desert to mountain range. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, he left behind something unprecedented, not just territory, not just conquered peoples. He left behind a military doctrine that turned warfare into replicable process, and one of Genghis' grandsons, Hulagu Khan, was tasked with carrying it west. In 1253, the Mongol Kurultai assigned Hulagu a specific objective: secure submission from every state between Mongolia and the Mediterranean, not just military defeat, submission. Because the Mongol Empire wasn't built on occupation, it was built on compliance. Cities that submitted early retained their autonomy. Their leaders stayed in power. Their people continued their lives. They just paid tribute and acknowledged Mongol supremacy. Cities that resisted stopped existing. Every target received the same sequence. Mongol messengers arrive. They present terms in writing. Submit immediately. Send tribute. Provide hostages. Usually sons of rulers. Accept Mongol governance. Compliance means survival. Your walls stay standing. Your markets stay open. Your population lives. Refusal triggers nothing immediate. No threats, no ultimatums, just silence. Weeks pass, sometimes months. The city continues its routine. Defenders begin to think maybe the Mongols were bluffing. Maybe they moved on to easier targets, and then the horizon fills with horsemen. Not in chaos. Not in scattered groups in formation. Cavalry units move in coordinated patterns. Siege engines arrive on wagons. The army doesn't attack. It surrounds completely. Every gate, every road, every escape route. Then construction begins. In full view of the defenders, the Mongols assemble siege equipment. Trebuchets designed to throw stones weighing 300 lb. Engineers from China and Persia work alongside Mongol soldiers. The defenders watch machines being built specifically to dismantle their walls. A second embassy arrives. The terms are repeated word for word exactly as before. This is the last chance. Most cities surrender here. If refusal continues, the siege begins. Not as chaos, as procedure. When walls collapse, infantry moves through in units. When gates break, cavalry secures routes. The city falls in sections. And once inside, the population is divided. Artisans identified and spared, scholars identified and spared, engineers identified and spared, everyone else gathered in fields outside the city. What happened next was documented by multiple sources. And it wasn't random violence. It was systematic elimination. The survivors were resettled in Mongol territories. The city itself was often burned, not as punishment, as evidence, because the Mongols didn't conquer for territory, they conquered for compliance. And every ruined city became a textbook for the next one. By 1257, Hulagu had already applied this system across Persia. Nishapur refused. Population eliminated. MV refused. Systematically depopulated. Herat refused. Reduced to ruins. Refusal had consequences that echoed across generations. And now Hulagu turned toward the greatest city between Persia and Egypt, Baghdad. In September 1257, Hulagu sent his envoys to Baghdad, 3 riders carrying a single letter. You have heard what has befallen the cities of Persia. You know the cost of refusal. Present yourself at our camp. Submit to the authority of the great Khan. Dismantle your fortifications. Send your sons as hostages. Do this and your city will be spared. Refuse and you will learn what the others learned. The letter arrived at the Caliph's court on a Thursday. By Friday, the debate had begun. Caliph Al-Musta'sim convened his advisors. The room divided immediately. His vizier Ibn al-Kami urged immediate compliance. He laid out the evidence. The Khwarezmian Empire had fielded 400,000 soldiers. They had fortified cities. They had mountain strongholds, all of it gone. Nishapur had walls 30 f thick. MV had been called the city the world depends on. All of them erased. These are not raiders. Ibn al-Ai said, this is a military system that has refined itself across 50 years of continuous warfare. We cannot fight them. We can only survive them. He recommended immediate submission, full tribute payment, opening Baghdad's gates before the siege began. The head of Baghdad's army disagreed. The Mongols were horsemen steppe cavalry. They excelled in open terrain. Baghdad's walls had never been breached. They have no experience with siege warfare against prepared defenses, he argued. And they're far from their supply base. They can't maintain a siege in hostile territory. A third faction invoked theology. Baghdad was the seat of the Caliphate. The city represented the center of Islamic civilization. God would not allow pagans to destroy the house of the Prophet's lineage, they argued. Al-Musta'sim listened. He was 54 years old. He had ruled for 16 years. He had never faced a military crisis of this scale. Contemporary sources describe him as fond of luxury, devoted to scholarship, uncomfortable with military matters, trusting in the authority of his position. He looked at the letter from Hulagu. He looked at his advisors and he made his choice. We are the Caliphate, he said. We do not submit to threats from horsemen. He ordered the envoys dismissed. No tribute would be sent. No preparations would be made. Ibn al-Ai the pragmatist vizier tried one more time. If we refuse, they will come. Then let them come, Al-Musta'sim replied. The envoys left Baghdad on September the 24th, 1257. They carried no response, just confirmation of refusal. What followed was more telling than the refusal itself. The Caliph didn't mobilize the army. He didn't reinforce the walls. He didn't open the treasury to pay for defenses. Instead, he continued his routine as if the threats would dissolve through inaction. Meanwhile, 300 mib to the east, Hulagu's army began moving. November 11, 1257. Mongol advanced forces appeared 30 mi east of Baghdad. Scouts reported back to the city. Cavalry units estimated 5,000 horsemen, no siege equipment visible. The military commander saw opportunity. If the Mongol force was small and isolated, Baghdad could destroy it in open terrain. A decisive victory would demonstrate Baghdad's military capability and discourage further Mongol advance. The commander recommended immediate offensive action. The Caliph agreed. On November 13, Baghdad's field army marched east, 20,000 men, 12,000 cavalry, 8,000 infantry. This was the largest force the Caliphate had assembled in decades. They carried 3 days of supplies. The plan was simple: intercept the Mongol advance force, engage in open battle, destroy them before reinforcements arrived, return to Baghdad victorious. November 15, 1257. The armies met 25 mi northeast of Baghdad. Baghdad's commander deployed his forces in traditional formation. Cavalry on the wings, infantry in the center. The Mongol force was visible across the field. Smaller than expected, maybe 4,000 horsemen. Baghdad's cavalry charged. What happened next was recorded by survivors who fled back to Baghdad. The Mongol line retreated, not in panic, in coordination. They fell back in organized units. Baghdad's cavalry pursued. The retreat continued 1 mile, 2 miles still organized. Then the flanks appeared. Mongol cavalry units that had been hidden in gullies to the north and south emerged simultaneously. Baghdad's cavalry found itself surrounded, not by the 4,000 horsemen they'd been chasing, by 15,000. What followed wasn't a battle. It was dismantling. Mongol cavalry archers fired while riding at full gallop. They used composite bows that could punch through armor at 200 wide. Baghdad's cavalry tried to regroup. The formations had already disintegrated. Officers shouted orders that couldn't be heard over the chaos. The infantry, watching from their position, saw the cavalry wings disappear into the Mongol formation. They began retreating toward Baghdad. The Mongols didn't pursue. They surrounded the remaining cavalry and methodically eliminated them. By nightfall, it was over. Survivors who reached Baghdad reported of 20,000 men who marched out. Fewer than 3,000 returned. The caliph's personal guard eliminated. The cavalry mercenaries destroyed. Baghdad's field army no longer existed. Not routed, not scattered, erased. When the survivors' reports reached the court, the nature of the situation changed. This wasn't a raiding party. This was a trap. The Mongols had used a small detachment to draw Baghdad's army into the open and eliminated it with precision. By December, the main Mongol force was visible on the horizon, and Baghdad's walls were all that remained. January 11, 1258, the Mongol army completed its encirclement of Baghdad. Hulagu commanded an estimated 150,000 soldiers. The Mongols didn't just surround Baghdad. They built infrastructure. Fortified camps were established at every gate. Guard rotations were scheduled. Supply lines stretched back to Persia. Escape became impossible. The Mongols began assembling siege engines, not hidden behind lines, in full view of the walls. Chinese engineers worked alongside Mongol soldiers. Trebuchets were built with geometric precision. Baghdad's defenders watched the construction day after day. They could see exactly what was being prepared, and they could calculate exactly what it would do to their walls. On January 17th, Hulagu sent another embassy. The message had changed. The time for full submission has passed, but the caliph may still preserve his life. Open the gates. Present yourself. Order your garrison to disarm. Do this within 3 days and the population will be spared. The caliph convened his remaining advisors. The pragmatist vizier recommended acceptance. We have no field army. We have no allies coming. We have no way to withstand what's outside our walls. The religious scholars still invoke divine protection. The caliph hesitated. 3 days passed. No response was sent. January 29th, at dawn, the trebuchets began firing. Not randomly, not for intimidation systematically. The Mongol engineers had spent 2 weeks calculating wall thickness, structural weak points, optimal impact angles. The stone struck the same sections repeatedly. Each impact created micro-fractures in stonework that had stood for 5 centuries. The bombardment continued for 8 hours, then stopped. The Mongols waited. Overnight, the damaged sections weakened further. February 1st, the bombardment resumed, concentrated on the weakened sections. By afternoon, cracks were visible from inside the city. By evening, the eastern wall began crumbling. February 5th, the eastern wall collapsed. A section 90 feet wide simply disintegrated. Mongol infantry moved toward the breach, not charging, walking in formation. They entered Baghdad in units, secured the breach, established a perimeter, advanced block by block. Baghdad's remaining garrison tried to hold the breach. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, outfought. By nightfall, the Mongols controlled the eastern quarter of the city. February 10th, the caliph sent an envoy to Hulagu's camp. The message was brief. I will surrender personally. I will open the gates. I will order my garrison to disarm. Spare the city. Hulagu's response arrived within hours. Present yourself at my camp tomorrow alone. On February 13th, 1258, the caliph walked out of Baghdad. The caliph didn't go to Hulagu's camp alone. He brought 3,000 members of the court, his sons, his ministers, his scholars, his generals. They walked through the gate, unarmed. Mongol guards flanked them immediately, not threatening, just present. The procession moved through the Mongol camp. Soldiers watched in silence. No insults, no violence, no visible anger, just observation. Hulagu received the caliph in his command tent. Hulagu's first question was practical. Where is your treasury? The caliph hesitated. We are prepared to offer tribute. Where is it? The caliph provided directions. Hulagu sent soldiers to verify. They returned 3 hours later. The vault was opened. What they found, Gold ingots, thousands of them, silver coins, countless chests, jewels accumulated over generations, silk enough to clothe an army. Hulagu ordered the entire treasury documented. Then he ordered the caliph brought there. The caliph was taken back into Baghdad through streets now controlled by Mongol soldiers. Past buildings beginning to smolder to his own treasury. The doors were open. Hulagu walked him through room by room, vault by vault. They didn't speak, but the question didn't need to be asked. Why was this wealth sitting here while your walls crumbled? Why were these coins in storage while your soldiers went unpaid? Why was this gold locked away while your city prepared for nothing? What happened next is reported differently across sources. The Persian historian Rashid Alan records Hulagu ordered the caliph to eat his gold to consume the wealth he'd valued more than his people's survival. Whether this literally occurred is debated. What's documented is what followed. The Mongols followed Tangist spiritual beliefs. One of their core taboos, royal blood must not touch the ground. Spilling it directly brings cosmic imbalance. So when executing nobility, alternatives were required for the caliph. They chose a specific method. He was wrapped in a carpet tightly, completely arms bound, legs immobilized, then laid on the ground outside the treasury. Horses were brought forward. The horses didn't trample randomly. They were led slowly, deliberately across the wrapped figure repeatedly. The weight of the horses crushed the body inside the carpet. No blade was drawn. No executioner announced judgment. No formal proclamation was made. When it ended, the caliph was dead. No blood had touched the earth. The taboo was satisfied. But something else had been created. A method that would be discussed in every court from Anatolia to Delhi. A death that carried meaning beyond mere execution. The caliph's sons were separated from the court group. All of them. Contemporary sources report they were executed the same day. Some accounts say they were also wrapped and crushed. Others suggest they were killed out of sight. What doesn't vary, all died. No heirs survived. The caliph's daughters were taken from the group. Their exact fate is recorded vaguely. Some sources mention them being distributed among Mongol officers. Others say they were sent east to Mongol territories. After February 13th, they disappear from detailed historical record. The 3,000 who had walked out with the caliph, ministers, scholars, generals were divided. Those with useful skills were identified and removed, engineers spared and sent to Mongol service. Physicians spared, administrators who knew local governance spared. The rest were executed outside the city. The Abbasid dynasty, 500 years of continuous rule, ended that day. No succession occurred. No heir escaped. No continuation was possible. The family line that traced back through 37 generations to the Prophet Muhammad's uncle was severed. And the news began spreading before the bodies were cold. After the caliph's death, Hulagu gave Baghdad to his soldiers. For 13 days, the Mongol army divided Baghdad into sectors. Each unit was assigned specific districts. They moved systematically, building by building, street by street. Anyone with demonstrable skills was separated. Artisans who worked with metal, wood, or stone. Scholars who could read and write. Merchants who knew trade routes. They were marked and removed to camps outside the city. Valuables were collected systematically. Gold, silver, jewels, silk, spices, manuscripts. Everything of value was catalogued and removed. Everyone remaining was moved outside the walls. What happened next is described in sources from multiple perspectives. The elimination was methodical. Estimates of the death toll vary wildly. Contemporary sources claim anywhere from 200,000 to 1 million dead. Modern historians suggest the actual number was likely between 90,000 and 200,000. What's verified is the aftermath. After the population was dealt with, the city itself was addressed. The House of Wisdom burned. Manuscripts thrown into the Tigris River. So many books that the river reportedly ran black with ink. The Grand Mosque partially demolished. The caliph's palace razed. The canal system deliberately damaged. Not random destruction. Deliberate to ensure Baghdad couldn't quickly recover. February 20th, Hulagu ordered his army to withdraw. They left behind a city with entire neighborhoods erased, infrastructure damaged beyond immediate repair, a population reduced by half at minimum. But they also left something else. Survivors, specifically, survivors who could tell others what they'd seen. Because the Mongols didn't want Baghdad erased from memory. They wanted it remembered. Within weeks, the story of Baghdad reached Damascus. Within months, it reached Cairo. Within a year, every court from Anatolia to India knew exactly what had happened. Not just that Baghdad fell, But how and what happened to the man who thought he was untouchable? After February 1258, something changed across the Islamic world. Cities that had been preparing resistance suddenly reversed course. Damascus opened its gates before the Mongols arrived. Aleppo sent tribute and hostages preemptively. Smaller emirates throughout Syria and Iraq submitted without seeing a single Mongol soldier. Because Baghdad hadn't just been destroyed, it had been demonstrated. Rulers across the region performed the same calculation. Resist, face a siege you cannot win, watch your city burn, wrapped in a carpet while your family is erased. Submit, retain your position, pay tribute, survive. The equation was clear. The Mongol expansion finally stopped in 1260 at the Battle of Ajalut. The Mamluks, a military state based in Egypt, defeated a Mongol army in open combat. But even the Mamluks had learned from Baghdad. They didn't rely on walls. They didn't trust in sacred authority. They built their entire society around one purpose: creating a military force capable of stopping the Mongols in the field. They studied the Mongol system. They adapted elements of it. They prepared specifically for that confrontation. Because they understood what Baghdad hadn't. The Mongols weren't raiders you could wait out. They were a system you had to match. Baghdad survived as a city. People returned, markets reopened, trade resumed, but it never recovered its position. The center of Islamic civilization moved elsewhere. The House of Wisdom was never rebuilt. The collected knowledge was never reassembled. The scholars who died were never replaced. But something else persisted. The memory of what defiance cost. Long after Hulagu's death, long after the Mongol Empire fragmented, long after the steppes fell silent, the shape of Baghdad's fall remained, preserved in chronicles that circulated across continents, repeated in courts whenever advisors debated resistance, calculated in every throne room that considered defying a superior force. Titles don't negotiate with tactics. Tradition doesn't stop siege engines. Sacred authority doesn't deflect arrows. When systems collide, the one that adapts survives. The one that doesn't becomes a case study, and some case studies echo for centuries. The Mongols didn't need to destroy Baghdad. They needed everyone else to know they could and would, and exactly what would happen to rulers who believed their position made them immune. That message outlasted the empire that sent it. Because what happened in February 1258 wasn't just military action. It was communication written in smoke and stone and carpet-wrapped bodies. A warning that traveled faster and farther than any army ever could. And some warnings once taught never need repeating. This is Crimson Historians, where history isn't softened for comfort. Subscribe if you want the pattern behind the events. Not just what happened, but why it kept happening. Thanks for watching.